Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce's Ukraine War news update, second part thereof for the 6th of December 2023. We're going to start with the military aid and other aid, and then go on to have probably a big rant about Congress in the US again, second day in a row. And I don't know how long that rant will last, but then we'll, if I have time for this video, get onto geopolitics. Right, we're going to start with this. Well, an excerpt from the Washington Post that talks about South Korean military aid to Ukraine. South Korea is the largest supplier of shells to Ukraine after the United States, according to the Washington Post. But we're going to dip into this. It's not quite as good. Well, it is great. It's absolutely fabulous, but it's what we already knew. I want to see South Korea directly provide Ukraine with military aid, and I don't think that is this. So the publication notes that the country delivered more shells than the entire European Union and did it in just 41 days, more than 300,000 155mm shells. And again, I'm not sure it quite says exactly that. So let's dip into this. This is a very, quite famous Washington Post article now that talks about how the issues with the counteroffensive, talks about gives an evaluation of everything that's taken place. Ukraine the latest, and Dom Nichols from that podcast did a bit of analysis on this article, talk about the language used in it, disagreeing with how certain things were couched. But we're going to go down to I've got so much to do in terms of extra videos. I've got so much content lined up, but I'd like to go through this as well. We're going to join it a long way down here. It's a big old article. So Sullivan, this is Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, laid out options. South Korea had massive quantities of the US provided munitions, but its laws prohibited sending weapons to war zones. The Pentagon calculated that about 330,000 155mm shells could be transferred by air and sea within 41 days if Seoul could be persuaded. Right? The publication notes that the country delivered more shells than the entire European Union, and it did it in just 41 days, more than 300,000 shells, says Max 23. And, sometimes I do question Max 23 particularly. I know I keep using them, but the inaccuracy with this, I'm a big one on making sure we get our words accurate, because it doesn't say that. The article says that Sullivan calculated that could take place. Right, that they could transfer within 41 days 330,000 rounds. Now, senior administration officials have been speaking with counterparts in Seoul who were receptive as long as the provision was indirect. The shells began to flow at the beginning of the year, eventually making South Korea a larger supply of artillery ammunition for Ukraine than all the European nations combined. Okay, so that bit is what did happen, but we don't know that it happened in 41 days, and we don't know that the figure 330,000 is indeed what was actually delivered. It could be more, could be less, but we must not confuse our modals, our probabilities, our possibilities with what did happen here. So language is important. Anyway, the more immediate alternative would entail tapping the US military's arsenal of 155mm shells that, unlike the South Korean variant, were packed with cluster munitions. And then, of course, we went through that whole D. Pickham's cluster munition issue. But anyway, South Korea have provided a lot indirectly to Ukraine. I would like that to change to being direct provision, and also we just need to be careful about some of the claims. Although the claim that they are the largest, have supplied more than the EU, certainly at one point in time, I don't know if that is still the case, because the EU is consistently supplying and is ramping up its production levels on a monthly basis. Now, I don't know whether those shells that were provided by South Korea have come to an end now. That was a one-off thing, or whether South Korea are continually providing. But if they can't do it directly, at some point they would fill up US stocks. The US would have given all their stocks to Ukraine, and then where do you go from there? So I don't know how sustainable that model is. Germany may transfer new RCH 155mm self-propelled artillery installations to Ukraine as early as this next year, and these were punted down the road. I mean, it was great. Germany are going to supply these rather neat little self-propelled guns, wheeled variant, a wheeled SPG. but they were going to be, as I say, possibly into 2025, or it might be moved forward. This was announced by Alex Scheibel, the managing director of the Krauss Maffei Wegmann manufacturing company responsible for the development of the self-propelled guns. The first customer is Ukraine, Scheibel reminded. He added that the RCH 155mm gun module fires 155mm artillery ammunition while moving, which makes it unique in the world. This is an SPG gun that takes scoot and shoot to another level. It's like you can shoot while you're scooting. So I guess that's beneficial, but I don't, so it's harder to hit. But I would assume that they would almost always stop fire and then just shoot straight away afterwards, because I don't know how much of a competitive advantage that gets you. Anyway, the United States says next it has more than 6,000 M1 Abrams tanks, of which more than 2,600 are operational. It makes you wonder what the other 3,400 are doing. And if they're not operational, they're obviously just sitting in warehouses. I'll tell you who could use them. Get them fixed up. Get a bit of engineer, get a number of engineers working and paying tax, and more jobs in the engineering industry for the Americans. Fixing up 3,400 Abrams would be useful, and then ship them over to Ukraine. But as Nexus said, Ukraine only received 31, wrote the Bild analyst Julian Röpke. It's a bit of a tabloid sensationalist, but it's actually absolutely true. How could Ukraine win the war against Russia with that tiny amount? He added. It just is really frustrating because, and I know it shouldn't all come down to the US. Of course it shouldn't. Europe needs to up their game. They are upping their game, but just Europe don't. The reality is Europe does not have the existing stocks of weaponry that Ukraine desperately need. I would say tanks are probably down the list of things they need at the moment. Nonetheless, when you look at 6,000 M1 Abrams, however many thousands of Bradleys they've got, APC, Strikers, all sorts. There is an awful lot of scope for the US with Lend-Lease as well. So I was asking, why is Lend-Lease? Why are we not hearing about that? Apparently, it ran out, I think, in August, September this year. So that would need to be renewed. It was a year-long thing. Unfortunately, it ran out because that could be used now to get around this Congress impasse. I mean, that's the whole reason it was kind of reinvigorated, the Lend-Lease bill. America are key, whether the EU and Europe and the UK up their game. It's going to be really difficult for Ukraine to prevail without the support of the US. It's just the nature of the beast. Belgian Defence Minister Ludovine Dedonder confirmed the country's intentions to transfer F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine in 2025. Look at these two chalk and cheese. We highly appreciate your steadfast support and comprehensive participation in the process of strengthening the defence capabilities of the armed forces of Ukraine, says Defence Minister Umarov. This is great. Thank you, Belgium. They are a little bit behind the curve in terms of what other nations have given. Belgium do have quite a meaningful defence industry, but not as forthcoming with stuff. But then arguably their own defence forces are somewhat depleted and underfunded. But again, these are the things that kind of need to change. We are moving into a period where, sadly, I am not an advocate. Traditionally, I'm not an advocate of defense military industrial complexes. This is just not my thing. I would rather spend money on sustainable industries to do with, green tech and stuff like that. That's the kind of person I am. And I am advocating that Europe, US, UN need to be prepared for the threats of Russia. We are not. Russia have gone and invaded Ukraine. We need Ukraine to prevail. Absolutely 100% for global stability, for all sorts of really bona fide reasons. And also, we need to be wary of China with regard to Taiwan and destabilization of the world from that neck of the woods. So there needs to be some very, very important strategic planning in the military spheres from the EU, NATO, and the US that will require a ramping up of production of equipment for ourselves. I mean, I look at the UK. Like I advocate giving Ukraine most of our tanks, but that requires buying some tanks, building some tanks. Now, the UK is at a very significant juncture where we're like, do we build tanks indigenously, or do we do what Poland does and buy them in and maybe build them under license in the UK? That is a discussion that's going on at the moment, and it's split people in the UK. I've been on threads where people have been vociferously arguing over this. But it needs to be done, and Ukraine need to prevail. Give them a bunch of tanks, lend them tanks. Look, here's 100 tanks. We'd like them back, if possible, if they're still alive, in a couple of years' time. But here's 100 tanks. Just do it. Netherlands announced €8 million aid in stabilising Ukraine's liberated territories. Ukraine's effort to re-establish safety in public services in liberated areas receives a major boost from Dutch funding. So the Dutch, even though they're in this kind of weird limbo situation where they haven't formed a government, and it can take as much as 9 months to form a government, especially when Geert Wilders is so divisive a character, it's going to be quite difficult for him to form a unified administration. But it's good to see that the Dutch are still operating, fairly consistently there. British Foreign Secretary, so that's Grant. No, that's not Grant Shapps. That is David Cameron. Commits to maintaining UK military for Ukraine, having already provided £4.7 billion. Funding for next year is expected to equal or surpass current levels. Excellent, UK. Thank you. Keep that up. Personally, I think we need to just be upping it, and as with America, let's get our own industry booming in terms of let's get some jobs going. Let's be producing stuff indigenously for Ukraine. UK announces 46 million humanitarian aid package for Ukraine. UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron will announce £7.75 million or $9.8 million in aid for Ukraine, raising the total of new winter humanitarian response package to £36.8 million. It's something, $46.3 million. It's something we've been concentrating on a lot. There's been this winter aid package that's been on the cards since September, I think, or maybe earlier than that, probably. No, I think it was announced all the way back in July. And anyway, it keeps raising its head, this thing, this winter aid package, and it seems like there's some more going into that as well. Right, let's get on to the situation in Congress in the US. Okay. So the Republicans have given an ultimatum to Biden and Democrats: no funding to Kyiv if the US does not implement immigration reform. And that's it. It is basically come down to that. It's like, we ain't doing that unless you do this. And this is what's made me angry yesterday, and it continues to make me angry. So apparently President Zelensky will not participate in a secret briefing. So he was going to brief the Senate, but then something came up last minute. I don't know if he read the room and is like, I think the Republicans aren't going to appreciate me talking to them, so pulled out, or whether there was some last minute hiccup, as was claimed. But here is Mitch McConnell. Now, Mitch McConnell was a really big support for Ukraine over the last 6 months. He has been a staunch supporter, going against the grain of other Republicans. Him and Mitt Romney have been staunch supporters of Ukraine. Both these two have flipped overnight. I don't know if they're in the UK. I don't know what the term is in the US, but in the UK we call them party whips. So party whips in the UK whip up support for partisan issues. So the Tory party will have their whip or their whips at the moment, and what happens is something's coming up in Parliament in the UK, and it's going to be a difficult vote where maybe not all the Conservative politicians are going to be assured to support that. The party whips will go around and whip up support. Now, in the UK, we know that they have little black books. There's a really interesting documentary, was it in the 90s or maybe in the 2000s, came out where former Tory politicians admitted that they held compromat over the former whips over other people, over their own politicians. So what these whips would do is use everything in their toolbox to be able to convince politicians to vote on very important issues or divisive issues or issues where they weren't assured to get the majority. And that meant, having a little black book with like, oh, we know what you like to do on Saturday evenings. And, if you don't want that leaking to the press, you need to vote. Anyway, it's really interesting. There's three people. It's Mitt Romney, Mitch McConnell, but Lindsey Graham. So Lindsey Graham the other day was one that did that about face. And I talked about how they definitely have compromat on him. Like, I know the compromat on him. Just so I can understand. I can explain why he might have switched. But we have two people, Mitch McConnell, who's usually the kind of person who is forcing other people to do stuff. He's your speaker. We have Mitt Romney just switching. Something significant has happened here in the Republican Party where they've become supremely united. And they've united over this issue in a way that really, really annoys me. Now, this is Mitch McConnell.
On the Republican side in the Senate has been more...
Sorry, I can't get this any louder, and I don't edit this afterwards, so you're going to have to turn this up for him because it's not the loudest.
Enthusiastically supporting the idea of a comprehensive supplemental that deals with Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. We want that to pass. But while we're talking about borders, my advice to the majority leader last week was, if you don't believe how serious we are about this, then file cloture. And so I'm advocating, and I hope all of our members vote no on the motion to proceed to the shell, to make the point, hopefully for the final time, that we insist on meaningful changes to the border. James Lankford, I designated to be the lead on this, but we've had a number of members who have been involved in it over the years without much success. Now is the time to pay attention to our own border, in addition to these other important international concerns.
Now, I don't know why they didn't do this when Trump was in charge with the House and the Senate on his side. They didn't do this, but now the Democrats are in charge. They are holding the Ukraine aid hostage to this. And you've got now Mitch McConnell saying he will die on this hill. We will say no until this is sorted out. But, okay, a few things to note here. Mitch McConnell, let's just remember who Mitch McConnell is. I'm no fan of his. Moscow Mitch. Why is he called Moscow Mitch? Well, in 2019, the US were looking to sanction Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska, who's a big old oligarch. He's a controversial figure, known to be an influential and powerful ally to the Kremlin. In 2018, the Department of Treasury established sanctions against Deripaska, along with other Russian oligarchs, for taking part in a range of malign activity around the globe. Bloomberg later reported that Deripaska was evading those sanctions. So Democrats moved to enforce the sanctions against Deripaska, but were defeated by a McConnell-led Republican majority, right? We need to remember all these things. Sometimes we forget this. So Moscow Mitch and how in bed the Republican Party might be with certain Russian influences. So the sanctions had majority support in both the House and the Senate, but the measures needed a supermajority, 60 votes in the Senate, rather than just a 50-50. Republicans followed former President Trump's warmer attitudes towards Russia and successfully blocked the sanctions in a 57-42 vote. And this is how Senator McConnell got his nickname Moscow Mitch. At the same time as McConnell blocked the sanctions, there were negotiations between a Deripaska-owned company, Rusal, and an American entrepreneur with plans to build an aluminum factory in Kentucky, Mitch McConnell's home state. Deripaska's company had dangled to Mitch McConnell that they might build a big new factory in Mitch McConnell's home state, Rachel Maddow said, and then McConnell took those otherwise unthinkable steps to protect Deripaska and ease the sanctions on him. McConnell told reporters that his vote and efforts to lift the sanctions were completely unrelated to anything that might happen in my home state, Politico reported. Politico also found that ex-McConnell staffers were also lobbying on the development of the same aluminium factory in Kentucky. So Mitch McConnell and his staffers were lobbying on behalf of a Russian oligarch building a factory in McConnell's home state, and they lobbied successfully such that the vote didn't succeed in sanctioning that Russian oligarch connected to the Kremlin. Maddow's reminder comes as the FBI recently raided homes linked to Deripaska, both in New York and DC. The FBI told the New York Times that agents were conducting a law enforcement operation pursuant to a law enforcement investigation. According to the Times, people familiar with the matter say the raids were related to the sanctions that Deripaska had evaded. This is so frustrating. It's so unfair. I hate stuff like this. So Republican lawmakers then walked out of Ukraine aid talks last night that Zelensky cancelled in doing a talk for. Biden administration said it slowed the pace of some military assistance to Kyiv in recent weeks to try to stretch out supplies until Congress approves further funding. Quote, Congress has to decide whether to continue to support the fight for freedom in Ukraine as part of the 50-nation coalition that President Biden has built, or whether Congress will ignore the lessons we've learned from history and let Putin prevail, said Jake Sullivan. It's that simple. It's a stark choice. We hope the Congress, on a bipartisan basis, will make the right choice. But they won't because they've changed their minds. So Mitt Romney on Twitter said, Democrats want $106 billion Democrats want $106 billion. So he's now saying that, well, the Democrats want support for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and the border, interestingly. Democrats want that. We want a closed border. What does a closed border even mean? Anyway, loads of people have absolutely rounded on Mitt Romney on Twitter. I mean, this thread is a lot of people getting angry with Mitt Romney and his kind of double standards. That's the trade. So this is a trade. But what's really interesting is not a trade on $106 billion, as I will show you from the letter from Mike Johnson. It is a trade only on Ukraine aid. Why only Ukraine aid? This is what really irritates me, because these things are not connected. The border issue, I'm not saying anything about the border. You can, fix up the border however you like, but that's a separate issue to Ukraine aid. And to hold Ukraine aid hostage over that, these are not connected, and this is using political leverage. Of course it is, but people will die. Like to see that anyway. Continue. That's the trade. But clueless Dems want to negotiate the border bill. No, you want to negotiate it. Like, this is just turning it all around and blaming the Democrats. You're the ones that brought the border into this. You can't blame the Democrats. And I'll show you exactly my analogy. It's not going to happen. Is an open border more important to Dems than Ukraine and Israel? Okay, well, actually, Israel's not part of it. So this is Mike Johnson's letter sort of back to the Treasury Department. I'm in receipt of your letter. So that letter I talked about yesterday that he received. Anyway, that is Shalanda Young. So to the extent of that the administration's latest request seeks aid for our ally Israel, I am pleased to remind the White House that that the House of Representatives has already addressed that need responsibly with H.R. 6126, the Israel Security Supplemental Appropriations Act. We passed the bill with a bipartisan vote more than a month ago on November the 2nd, 2023. H.R. 6126 includes the vital security assistance requested for Israel and is fully offset. Senate Democrats, however, have refused to consider the measure. In fact, when given a chance to debate H.R. 6126, all 51 Senate Democrats voted to block the consideration of the bill. Okay, so the first thing to note here is that Mike Johnson is saying very clearly that we're cool with Israel money going. We've already said that if that's separated, Israel would go, but not Ukraine. Holy cow, Israel need that money less than Ukraine. You are basically saying we are cool with Israel bombing Gaza, but we're not cool with Ukraine trying to stop Putin. That's what this communicates, Mike Johnson, and it's disgusting. But basically, this is saying it's only Ukraine, that we have a hold up on, and why not anything else? Why not the Israel package? Why are you holding only Ukraine to hostage over the border security? These are not connected. With respect to the administration's request, for additional Ukraine funding, the position of congressional Republicans has been clearly articulated since October the 26th, 2023. On that day, I met in the Situation Room with you, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, and other key leaders to present two essential prerequisites: security at our border and critical answers regarding the funds requested. And here you might say, okay, this is slightly different from Israel, because he's going to say, first, I explained the supplemental Ukraine funding is dependent upon enactment of transformative change on our nation's border security laws. Why? Why is Ukraine dependent on security reforms at the border? House of Representatives has led the defining reforms to secure America's borders and passed H.R. 2, the Secure the Border Act of 2023, more than 6 months ago. Senate Democrats have refused to act on the bill. It goes on to say, second, I explained that Congress and American people must be provided with answers to our repeated questions concerning the administration's strategy to prevail in Ukraine, clearly defined and obtainable objectives, transparency and accountability for US taxpayer dollars invested there, and what specific resources are required to achieve victory and a sustainable peace. I actually broadly agree with that. I think the US administration needs to do that. But to use that when that hasn't been done in Israel, and it hasn't been done in Taiwan either, is disingenuous, and it's double standards. So what he's doing is saying, right, I am going to attach loads of criteria to the Ukraine bill that are much, much more difficult for you guys to jump through those hoops to get this money to Ukraine. But I will not attach that to the Israel. I'm not going to ask the same things for the Israel money. I'm just going to say, yeah, we've already agreed that. That's fine with me. Fair enough. I'm cool with that, and the money for Taiwan, yeah, that's fine. It's only Ukraine. It's only Ukraine that we're wanting these hoops you've got to jump through. And then with regard to the US border, we want X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z, and he goes on to talk about that. So this really is demanding this trade. This trade of one thing for another. But I pointed out the other day that this was unconnected. Now, someone said back to me, this person is, just to let you know, this is Charles Phillips. So Charles Phillips says back to me, Jonathan, the aid for Ukraine is being held up by the Democrats. No, it ain't. Who refused to secure the southern border due to politics. This is like victim blaming. It really is. If the Dems agree to secure our border, then aid will flow to Ukraine. How's that for a turn on your narrative? It's a false equivalence, and it's a false analogy that he provides later as well. To say that aid for Ukraine and the US border disaster is a non sequitur, so one doesn't follow one for the other, is wrong. Because in politics, things that seem unconnected become connected to create leverage. Well, that was my point. So, I mean, it is a non sequitur, and it is being used just as leverage. Non sequiturs don't exist in politics because what is important for you creates leverage for me, and politics is all about finding and creating those connections and leverage. That's exactly what is going on here, but it's to say that Ukraine is not important when it super is, right? And it is also... I'm just going to pick apart what he said here because I think this is important for understanding what's going on. So I said, no, that's not how it should work, but it is how it is playing. Let's do a reductio. So I'm kind of trying to reduce this to an absurd level, at least to its core logical components. So Jim says, we need to help this old lady who is about to get mugged. So there's an old lady about to get mugged over there. Harry says, no, I won't let you help her until you give me $500. And Jim says, but she needs our help now. And Harry says, sure, and I need $500 now. Those two things aren't connected. Like, you know, me as Jim giving you $500 is not connected to her getting mugged. Yeah, but we can only help her together, right? Because that's a big guy that's mugging her. But I agree, you know, yeah, I'll tell you now, she needs help. Yeah, she needs help. She needs help. She might even die. But I ain't helping her until you give me $500. And then the woman gets mugged. And here's the key. Here's the key to the logical problem this guy has. Harry then says, it's your fault she got mugged and we didn't help because you didn't give me $500. Hang on, so it's my fault we didn't help her because you demanded $500 off me so that we helped her. So now it's my fault that we're not helping the old lady. So it's the Democrats' fault that the US is not helping Ukraine. That's the logical analogy. And he goes on to say it's the same. He then goes on to give me I won't go into it, but he then connects the $500. He said, no, it's more like, I will tell you, just because it's useful to know this. No, I'm in favour of letting potential muggers into I will help her, but let's do something about all the muggers flooding in from our community. No, you're connecting those ideas of her getting mugged to what you want from me. That's not what's going on with the Congress. So he then does a counter and presents a false analogy. Is an invalid move. This is not about connecting in this case, what Harry wants, but what the Republicans want to Ukraine, because these are two unconnected things. There should be an argument over the immigration and border issues, and there should be aid to Ukraine. Ukraine needs that aid now, and it needs that aid now for the benefit of the entire world. It needs that aid now so that Ukrainians don't die, right? This is in Americans' best interest. It's in the world's best interest. This is in the interest of global security. But this is basically using the Ukraine aid as a means to an end. This is using it purely as leverage. Now, this is what happens in politics. It's just here, it shouldn't happen. People's lives are at risk. And not only that, the package is even smaller for the next year than it was for last year. If the Biden administration wants Ukraine to win this war, then they should request more than they did the year before in military aid to Ukraine from Congress. The package asks for 33% less military aid in financial year 2024 than 2023. So it's not even, enough. So we see Rustem Umerov, and unfortunately I can't see this through Fox News. Is not playing in my country, but the defense minister has appeared on Fox News to present obviously the Ukrainian side of the coin. If anyone can kind of let me know what is said on this, it won't play. There's probably some kind of geofencing going on, but I hope I've put my views across well enough here. Like, I think you can use this as a political football. That's what people do in politics, but there is no connection between these two, and I don't think you should use this as political politics. It's too important. It's too important for the world. And actually, Putin, by doing this, you are playing into Putin's hands. And why are you choosing Ukraine and not any other thing in Congress, any other bill, any other policy? Is only Ukraine, and that is very clearly set out by what Mike Johnson says. He's very clear on that. It's like, we're cool with Israel. Yeah, we'll fund them, no problem. Yeah, Netanyahu can bomb the crap out of Gaza, no problem. We'll fund that. That's not an issue. However, giving weaponry to Ukraine, that's a problem. Why? Well, I don't know. Maybe Putin's giving me some money. I don't know. Oh, man. Anyway, I'm going to quickly whiz through the rest of the geopolitical stuff. But I am going to segue into the geopolitical stuff through some more discussion on what's going on in America. So what's at stake if Ukraine loses, says Euromaidan Press. Global security may spiral if Ukraine falls, with dictators embracing nukes while Americans question wasted aid and credibility. Putin sees the conflict as a war with NATO itself, so Ukraine's fall would likely spur conquest of more Eastern European nations before Russia's demographic collapse. Zelensky himself warned Russia would then target NATO countries, so the West must either shamefully appease an aggressor thriving on weakness or send open military support. Some ask Ukraine today, Taiwan tomorrow, as China boasts the world's largest military, also seeking inevitable victory in any conflict. America's global leadership is also at stake. Despite fair criticism of past interventions, Russia wages a different kind of conquest war not seen since Stalin and Hitler. This is all important. I mean, Andrew Perpetua says the United States is willing to destroy itself and its allies for the sake of winning cheap political points. Interesting, David D and Andrew Perpetua have a right old argument about that. Now, this quote from Rocketfish Studios is spot on. So yes, Speaker Johnson is playing smart national politics with the Republican holdouts. However, in stating that he doesn't want to see Russia win and understanding the importance of keeping Europe safe from further Russian aggression, what he is in fact doing is sending a very dangerous message to the US allies in Europe. That message very clearly is that if he doesn't get what he wants, then he's quite prepared to let them swing in the wind by sacrificing Ukraine and making further Russian aggression not just possible but probable. Playing national politics is one thing, but messing with your allies is a dangerous game because it puts them in a position of not knowing if the USA will be there to back them up or not, and uncertainty in these times about just how reliable their American military partner is going to be is just asking for trouble to develop. This is a really good point. If Mike Johnson is playing holdout on domestic issues that affect international partners, then international partners are going to get pissed off with the US. The national message he is sending to Americans is playing incredibly loose with Americans' European allies' legitimate safety concerns. He needs to get a shitload smarter, a shitload quicker, and he's going to find himself with more than just border issues on his mind. He's putting his own country's neck in a noose with this level of ignorance and stupidity. And that pretty much sums up my position of Mike Johnson. And we must remember, we're in a period of hyper-partisanship, where we've got this polarization in the US, and we've got a situation. I mean, I remember these T-shirts from a couple of years ago at a MAGA rally, right? Which is, I'd rather be a Russian than a Democrat. So you've got Republican base voters here that would rather do something to support Putin. They'd rather be Russian than to do anything that's remotely in line with the Democrats. So how can you reach across the aisle when you've got this kind of feeling? And that feeling, in my book, has now gone to the lawmakers. We've got such a divided. America's got such a divided Congress, such a divided House of Representatives, particularly. But now we've seen McConnell and Romney and Graham as senators pretty much saying the same thing, which is like, we ain't doing jack until the Democrats do exactly what we want them to do. What has happened to reaching across the aisle? What has happened to bipartisan working together to sort these things out? And they'll just say, oh, of course, this is intransigence with the Democrats over the border. Yeah, dude, you were in charge of the country for 4 years and you did jack. Like, you said you were going to build a wall and get Mexico to pay for it. What about that promise to the voters? That never happened. Empty promises. So don't go back to the Democrats and say it's your fault that the border's not getting sorted out and we want X and Y to happen. No. To me, this is something bigger to do with Ukraine. This is just... keep yourself in check, Piers. Right, the head of the OP Yermak, the Speaker of the Verkhovna Rada, Stefanchuk, and the Minister of Defense, Umarov, arrived on an official visit to the US. So they've sent over a number of people to the US, not Zelensky. They don't want him to be too divisive, I would have thought. But this is showing you how desperate things are in the US. And now, why this is doubly annoying me is not just that this is not getting the right things done in the US, but it is handing power and opportunity to Putin. So Putin is to make a rare trip abroad to discuss Israel-Hamas war with the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, Putin is getting out of his bunker and going to visit some people sitting on a fence over these issues and spreading his influence within the Middle East. Meanwhile, two mob bosses have got together and said, do you know how we can get out of having the police on our tails? Let's do a deal, says one boss to the other mob boss. Let's do a deal and see how we can break the law and sell our moonshine across the states. Iran and Russia agreed to jointly combat Western sanctions. Moscow and Tehran signed a declaration on jointly combating Western sanctions. Mob Boss 1 and Mob Boss 1 and Mob Boss 2 have jointly signed a deal to combat legal law enforcement. combating Western sanctions imposed against the two regimes over their role in the war against Ukraine, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on December the 5th at a meeting with his Iranian counterpart. So while the US is fighting over stuff that need not be fought over in that way, sure, fight over the border security and have a tussle. Do you know what you should do, Republicans? If you want that border sorted out, get yourselves elected in 2024 and change the laws yourself with a majority. That's probably what you should do, like in 2016 when you said you would do it. Right, this is kind of validating what was already thought. Russia planned to interfere with the accession of Finland and Sweden to NATO, according to secret intelligence reports, by whipping up anti-Islamic sentiment and demonstrations meant to anger Turkey. The goal has been to increase friction between Turkey and European countries and NATO. Finnish Security Intelligence Service SUPO confirmed that they knew about the Russian intelligence service's plans to incite demonstrations in Finland as well. We talked about this previously when they had the Quran burning in Sweden. And this was clearly influenced, sorted out by Russia. You could follow the money. I showed you that previously. This was to mess around with Sweden's accession to NATO, because you then had all these protests in Sweden. You had freedom of speech protests, which is basically the far right getting up in arms about Islamic extremism and Islamic immigration into Sweden and burning Qurans. But of course, this is exactly what Russia wanted, so that Turkey would then go, "Oh, what are you doing? Right, we're not too happy with you with your accession into NATO." This was organised by Russia and intelligence services, the Finnish intelligence services, saying, "Yeah, we've got evidence of that, and here's our report." And yeah, so exactly what we knew is whether Turkey must know that, but I guess they've got to play along with that, because otherwise their base electorate, who might not be so au fait with the machinations of the Kremlin and whatnot. So Turkey will need to be seen to be reacting strongly to that kind of those kind of activities in Sweden, whilst also knowing that it is. I'm pretty sure they'd know that it would be prompted by the Russians themselves. And finally, Senator Tuberville, so thank goodness for this, claims that he will release his hold on the flag officers except the 4 stars, so performative politics. I'll discuss that, he says later. Mark Hartney, and he actually went on TV and he was pretty angry about this. But I think it's 425 military positions are now going to be filled that have been waiting, that have been held up by Senator Tuberville. I've spoken to you about this previously, so at least that has changed, and he's going to just hold the top ones to ransom now. But anyway, let me know what you think about what's going on in Congress. I think it's incredibly dangerous, incredibly irresponsible, and you are just the American politicians are playing into the hands of Putin. Putin is laughing all the way back to his palace. He's loving it. Sort it out.